Well, good afternoon. My name is Phil. As I've just told some of you, I've been part of Hazelnut Community Farm since the beginning, really. So I've been working alongside John for 4 years, as the vision has kind of been actualized and then found land. So I'm really excited to be here at the Sustaining Church Conference for a second year. I'm currently training to become a vicar at Trinity Theological College. And joining me today is Mother Cherry, who I'll let her introduce herself a bit more in a moment. But just from the brief moment I've met her, I can already tell that we're in for a treat here. She's going to tell us some stories and lessons that she's learned from a project that really started, I think, out of our conference last year, our Sustaining Church Conference last year, about wilding a small urban church garden. And Cherry does all kinds of things, including chaplaincy in university and an arts chaplaincy. So I don't know quite how you have time to be a priest as well as all of the other stuff you do, lecturing in university and being a chaplain. But bless you, well done. And without any further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I'd say that the good thing is my daughter's grown up. And I don't have a partner. And I think if I had a partner, I wouldn't be able to do all the other stuff because they'd be telling me off. So as I mentioned in my abstract, if any of you've read it, I'm not a gardener. I've not actually ever had a garden, and I'm not really what you would call an outdoorsy sort of person. I have to confess that picnics fill me with utter dread. But somehow I've become the custodian of a garden and find myself much more involved than I ever thought possible, although I still avoid picnics. Of course, God calls who he calls and what he calls them to. A small matter of a lack of gardening experience and a desire to be left indoors during the summer was not going to get in the way of his plans. And soon a variety of unexpected events started to upend the fairly safe ministry I thought had been on the cards for me when ordained in 2015. The story of how I ended up at St Mark's is too long to explain here, but sufficient to say I was a self-supporting minister who was and still is working full-time as a lecturer in a sixth form college. I believed my call was to be an assistant priest in an established Anglo-Catholic church in Leigh-on-Sea, which is just down the road. And for those who've not heard of Leigh-on-Sea, it was a little fishing village in the estuary, which developed rapidly when the railway was installed. And it's actually been cited as one of those places that everybody wants to live in. So being at St Clement's meant that my ministry was looking very different. It allowed me to develop a ministry around the arts using my connections, and all things were going quite well. So I was not expecting to be uprooted and planted into a deprived urban context only 4 years later. Oops, not moving, hold on. Sorry, I'm not moving on. So in complete contrast, St Mark's was the smallest of 4 Victorian churches. Its previous priest had died very suddenly after 2 years in post. No one had much energy to pay it any attention, and it was in danger of closing. But I'd become friendly with some of the faithful people there as the college is close by, and I'd helped out sometimes. Then stuff started to happen that would see the breakup of the old parish, with one of the churches becoming an evangelical plant. Now this caused some angst amongst the other congregations because they were more Anglo-Catholic and felt that their traditions were going to be ignored. So somehow the Bishop of Bradwell decided I should apply for some money from the Strategic Development Fund as well, and we would be the kind of nominal Anglo-Catholic plant. Although I never liked the word plant, I always like to use the word seeding. From May 2019, I found myself then licensed for 2 very different parishes and actually in 2 different deaneries. with some funding to sort out the dry, rot and damp, and instructions to develop a vision for the church that would keep it open and viable. To say that I had no idea how I was going to do this on 2 days a week was a bit of an understatement. I actually never imagined I'd be a person in charge of a church, especially a church that was in a huge mess, because nobody ever wanted to throw anything out. And even the rotten old notice boards, and you can see the edge of one here and on the other side, still had the name of the deceased priest on them 2 years later. So I don't think there was an awful lot of hope for it. Then, I'm going backwards. No, I'm not. Nearly a year later, the pandemic hit and we closed. Although it was frustrating, it gave me a chance to think about how I could open up the church rather than being on a hamster wheel of trying to fit in church meetings and planning around teaching. So firstly, we got on with the building and decorating work. We started, as you can see, with bright new red notice boards. But as time progressed, we were still not in a position to reopen. We didn't have the technology for live streaming. So I turned my attention to what else we could do. And during this period, I was looking at becoming more eco-friendly. I looked at the church, the Eco Church Awards, and then I stumbled across the conference, Sustaining Church. And hearing what other faith communities were achieving, it challenged me to look at how we could do something in our context. And despite the uncertainties, a vision began to emerge, and one verse in Psalm 84 nibbled away at me. Even the sparrow finds a home and a swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. So I decided to stop worrying about bringing people into church and concentrate on making the exterior of the church a living illustration of what we're all about, showing just how much God loves us all. And as we got to grips with our ideas around the garden area, we began to see people of the local community recognize and value the role that the church plays in this corner of the world. I have to say, we still struggle financially. I'm still limited by time and age. We are definitely not a mega church, but by actively putting our trust in God, something is growing. And as I think God might say, it is good. I'm going to pause for a moment and share something of my story to faith, because the more I reflect back, the more I can see how God had plans for me long before. So when I took this project of St. Mark's on board, I was not sure how or what I was going to do. Luckily, God did. And it was consoling for me to kind of read this passage from Jeremiah, because now I look back and I can see that those plans were for my welfare and for this community that I was serving's welfare, and a future for hope. So back in 1994, I was made redundant after 17 years of working for the same company. I was a single parent of a 5-year-old. I had a mortgage to pay, yet I took a chance and enrolled on a history of art degree at University of Essex. Never sure if I was going to be able to study full-time for the whole of the period of the time, because I didn't know how the money was going to pan out. Actually, at that time, I was rather an intermittent churchgoer. However, as I became immersed in studying Renaissance art and architecture, I became more fascinated by the ways in which artists responded to biblical texts. Standing in front of works such as this frescoed Annunciation by Fra Angelico for the convent of San Marco began to awaken in me a joy and a desire to know God better. In contemplating Mary in the porticoed loggia that opens out onto a lush springtime garden, I recognized that just before the angel arrives, Mary had been sitting quietly, unaware that her life was about to change forever. I know that feeling, and I think many of us who say yes to God also know that. But back to the reality of an urban church in the 21st century. This slide gives you some idea of what the space looked like before we got to work. Now, 20 years ago, a local group had cultivated some of the space with some raised beds and some fruits. And that's from, you can see images 1 and 2. However, children grew up, families moved on, and soon there was no real group action, apart from one loyal family who tidied when they had time. Unfortunately, being close to the town centre and being shut much of the week, the church appeared neglected and began to attract a certain amount of rubbish, as you can also see, as well as drug and alcohol misuse in the evenings. As you can also see in 4, 5 and 6, there is a waist-high stone wall that marks the boundaries of the church. So it's not a huge garden, but it's kind of long and thin and skinny. And this runs down 2 of its 4 sides. There's a break in one side for the church door and another for the pathway to the hall doors. And the ground was covered in this large crazy paving slabs, which underneath were layers of black plastic. I'm not quite sure why you put black plastic sheeting under there. I tell you, I'm not a gardener. At the corner, the wall ran diagonal. You can just about see in image 7, that diagonal wall. And there was something about that space which really drew my attention. So a bit more about that later. But where to start? So as you now know, I am not a gardener. I don't know anything about plants, and there was no one in the congregation whose health or expertise could call upon. So what could I do? Then one evening, during a particularly tedious PCC meeting on Zoom, I was scrolling through my Facebook on my phone, like you do, and chanced upon a small advert for a group who was promoting the need to wildscape the world. This caught my attention and also reminded me of what Andy Atkins had spoken about in his talk at the conference. So I messaged them. Soon Alana, who ran the group, was on the case. I have to say, sometimes too much on the case, because her drive and a lack of understanding of how the church works meant that she was often working at kind of loggerheads with me, who was having to go through various other things. So it wasn't plain sailing, but from our early discussions over Zoom, I was able to explain a vision which was about honouring the balance of sanctity of the space between humanity and all life. I spoke to her a bit about how Adam was not created in dominion over creation, but in Genesis we hear how he was created from the same earth as the rest of creation. She went away and started to pull people together who could come along to advise us. And she said she'd be able to help us raise funds. And her other job really was to keep prodding me through countless messages. So this is a drawing I made when I was sort of still in, we were still closed quite a bit, and to try and explain to her what I had, what my vision was really. We were looking at fruit trees, community garden, which could be reached from the path. We wanted some bird and bat and bee homes, as well as creating bug hotels. I wanted to remove that bit of wall at the diagonal and put a bench there. When Andy spoke last year, he said something about opening the church so that the love for God breaks down any barriers. And then the people around the church would be affected by this, even if they don't really know why. So my first idea was that part of the wall should come down. I'd put a bench there so to encourage people to stop for a moment. And as they pause and rest, they would be surrounded by God's lush creation. I actually did have some opposition from some people who felt I was asking for trouble in terms of litter and people using drugs on the bench and what have you. But I just kept thinking, well, it's for God's children, and even drug addicts are God's children. So if they want to sit on the bench, we just have to make sure we clear it up afterwards. And the odd thing is, it's actually proven to be very, it's not been used like that. I mean, there are beer cans on a Sunday morning, and there's a bit of rubbish from, you know, food packaging and what have you, but I've not had to pick up a single needle since. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. So Alana arranged for a builder to come along one Saturday morning and knock it down. And now he was brilliant. He arrived, refused a cuppa, banged the wall out and drove off again. By Sunday, the neighbours had noticed, as you can probably tell, and they were asking if a car had crashed into it. Soon we had a list of plants and trees proposed by another one of Alana's collections. This was a guy called Alex Greeves, who runs the Wild Roots Nature Connection community. He has a very gentle approach to nature. It's not a Christian community. It's more of, I suppose I'd say, a hippie community, if you like, if that makes sense. But his approach involves helping others find the best version of themselves using tried and tested techniques that have been passed down by indigenous cultures and applying them then in a modern context. Then, of course, we did need to raise money. And one of the problems that Alana found, she thought she could just tap into local businesses, but as soon as local businesses heard it was for a church, they weren't so keen. So we had to start finding other ways to get money. To start with, we were quite lucky that we had a few people who wanted to sponsor specific trees and plants. These are just some of the labels I had made up when we first opened, and we've still got to get those made up into little wooden plaques with QR codes and stuff, but that's still another job to do. But then the sponsorship dried up and we had to look for further funding, and this then Alana managed to find us a local community fund, and then badgered me into filling out all the forms and saying all that stuff you have to say about how it's going to benefit the community. I'm expecting to have to write a report on that sometime this year. We needed to get Alex from Wild Roots back down to start planting in the autumn. And these are just some photographs of his planting in progress. We had to call in favours to get all those paving slabs up because Alana suddenly told us, well, you've got to get them up before he gets there. So that was pretty back-breaking work. But while we were in church on Sunday morning and Alex was outside planting away, so many people, he told us, stopped to ask him about the project, even people joining in and offering help. Since then, I make sure I'm outside the church as much as possible before and after services, because people like to stop and chat and have a look at what we're doing. I tend to do my litter pick at that point. One morning, I had a woman who stopped me to say that I shouldn't have planted the fruit trees so close to the path, because she said, you know, people will pick them as they pass. And I was like, yes, exactly what I want to happen. Alex's choices of planting were a mix of plants and trees that could be medicinal, edible, and beautiful. He put up wooden trellises and planted hops and honeysuckle, as well as encouraging the existing roses to be trained over and around the windows. He sourced and planted the trees. We had dwarf pear, plum, cherry, and apple, and a silver birch. He also planted lemon balm, fennel, licorice, mint, lavender, rosemary, and sage, and made sure that the few bushes that had remained from the earlier garden were looked after and ready for more growth. And they included things like red currant and raspberries. Once the planting was done, we started to get the wildlife habitats in place. Hedgehog homes were made from recycled materials, bug hotels from the bricks that had been knocked out and then stacked against the old doorways of the church that were no longer in use. Then a local builder was so impressed with what we were doing that he offered his skills for free to blast some holes for our hedgehogs. to be able to get into the safe space. And he put in the bird and bat bricks. They obviously cost us quite a bit because they are designed to look as if they are part of the wall. You can see the middle picture shows you what they look like before they went in. And then where the ladder is, they're blending in with the old Victorian brickwork. We then bought some water bowls and bird baths as well to keep them all happy out there. As you can see from this slide, we sponsored a local artist who in lockdown had been trying to earn a living from drawing and selling cartoons of his dog and her adventures in the park. He produced some anti-litter banners for sale, and we felt we should have one on the church to support him, as well as raise awareness of the problem of litter in the local community. And we then signed up a pledge to go pesticide free. We informed the local pesticide action network group we'd done it, as well as the environmental counsellor at the council. And we found we got so much good attention on Facebook and local people just for this small action. Then we were able to bless the garden during our Climate Sunday service. And we also gathered outside to pledge the Climate Sunday Pledge together. So things were looking pretty good, but all winter, obviously not much was happening. Then one morning in March this year, this wonderful sight greeted me. The plum tree blossomed. I had to make everybody come out and have a look. We had to stop the service. We couldn't carry on. We had to come and have a look. Then the green tree leaves started to appear on apple and pear trees. And of course, for me, on the far right, the blossom on the cherry tree, which was my sponsorship, was totally exciting to see that appear. So the story, of course, keeps on going, and every week there seems to be something else to celebrate, and to be glad that God's plans for me involved getting a garden going. We have got our Bronze Eco Award largely because of this wildscaped area, and we are now hopefully on our way to silver. But the project sort of went in all sorts of different directions. So we now have new connections in our community. So a local eco person who's paid for by another organisation holds weekly eco days in the church to show people how to grow things. And the lettuces and rocket in the raised beds were planted by her, and they've already sprung up, and she's got other plans to introduce them to making herbal and medicinal teas from the plants as well. Then the scout, sorry to
interrupt, Cherry. This
is
looking amazing. I just want to warn you, you've got 2 minutes left. So if there's any more pictures that you want to skip through,
I will
it'd be great to see the final product. This is incredible.
It's nearly at the end. So the Scouts and Cubs also who use our hall, they're on watering duty, and they're using our garden to learn more about the environment around them. And I had exhibitions in the church. Art and design students used the idea of the urban botanicals as a theme for their print work. And we also had COVID memorial service where we painted pebbles and then planted them into the garden too. There's a little sanctuary at the back, which we converted from this rather unsightly space to this much nicer space, which is going to have a bit of a pond in it at some point. And I like the idea of a bucket pond. And there you can see our cherries. The cherries actually did bloom, which are fantastic. We have music events, and people have come out of the music events to help us as well. So I started this by saying I'm not a gardener, but perhaps there are more ways of being a gardener than being the gardener, if that makes sense. Every day I see the fruits of the work, which began with the idea of opening up the church by using the garden to speak about God's love. Back to the bench. There's some more pictures and more pictures. So back to the bench. So We were lucky enough to get a donated bench, and lots of people have sat and used it. I drive past it often, backwards and forwards from college, and I see students taking selfies and elderly people taking breathers. But the best thing was our first wedding, which is the first wedding since 2013. And this is actually my daughter who got married there. So, well, it makes a very, very nice wedding photograph moment. So there we go.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was what an amazing story. And as someone said in the comments, I could have sat and listened to the story of this garden for much, much longer than 25 minutes. So unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we're going to have to make room for our next workshop. But thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing with us. And
No,
I know that I will definitely look to find out more about your project and see some more photos. So maybe we could share something through our Hazelnut network to those
definitely.
that want to see that.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you,
You
and
too.
see you again.
Yes, take care. Take care, everybody.